There are moments in life when silence feels louder than any scream. Moments when you pray and nothing answers back. When you cry out and the heavens seem closed. When you do everything you were told was right, and yet nothing moves. And in those moments, a question begins to rise quietly in the heart. Not shouted, not declared, just whispered in the dark. God, where are you? You didn't plan to doubt. You didn't wake up one day deciding to question God. You just became tired. Tired of waiting. Tired of believing without seeing. Tired of holding on when your hands feel empty. You remember a time when God felt near, when prayer felt warm, when worship came easily, when faith felt alive. But now, there is space where His voice used to be, and silence has taken its place. Silence has a way of making us feel forgotten. It convinces us that if God were truly present, we would feel Him. That if He still cared, He would speak. That if He were listening, He would surely answer by now. And so we begin to interpret silence as absence. But listen to me carefully, weary soul. Silence is not the same as abandonment. The Bible is full of people who lived in the quiet. People who waited longer than they thought they could survive. People who prayed until their voices broke and still heard nothing in return. David cried, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever?" Job sat in ashes with no explanation. Joseph waited years in a prison for a promise that seemed dead. Even Jesus stood in the silence of Gethsemane, sweat and blood, hearing no answer except the road ahead. If silence meant God was gone, then God would have abandoned every one of them. But He didn't. The problem is not that silence is empty. The problem is that silence is unfamiliar. We are used to noise, we are used to reassurance, we are used to signs and confirmations and quick relief. Silence strips all of that away. And when everything familiar is gone, the heart begins to panic. Did I do something wrong? Did I miss God's voice? Is this punishment? Am I being ignored? These questions don't come from rebellion, they come from pain. And God is not offended by them. Let me tell you something you may not have heard before. God does not withdraw because you are weak. He draws nearer when you are. But His nearness doesn't always feel like warmth. Sometimes it feels like stillness. In Scripture, God often speaks loudest when He seems the quietest. Elijah stood waiting for God, not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in a still, small voice, not absence, presence, refined. Silence is often God's way of removing distraction so you can learn to hear Him differently. Because if God only spoke through noise, you would only trust Him when everything felt good. But God is forming something deeper. When He is silent, He is not testing your worth, He is training your trust. There are seasons when God speaks to guide you, and there are seasons when God is silent to grow you. Not because He enjoys your waiting, not because He is distant, but because roots grow deepest where no one can see them. And right now, something is growing in you. Even if you don't feel it, even if you don't believe it, even if you're barely holding on. God's silence is not a closed door. It is a quiet room where something sacred is happening. You are not being ignored. You are being held even if you cannot feel the arms. And if tonight you are listening with tears in your eyes, wondering if God has walked away, hear this gently. He is closer than your breath. He is nearer than your fear. And his silence is not the end of the story. But some of the most important work God does happens where there is no sound, no sign, no immediate relief. Seeds do not grow in noise. Thorns do not heal in chaos. Roots do not deepen in applause. They grow in the dark. When God grows quiet, he is not stepping away. He is stepping deeper. There are seasons when God speaks to direct you, and there are seasons when God is silent to develop you. Because if God answered every question immediately, faith would never mature. It would remain dependent on reassurance instead of relationship. You see, God is not trying to raise people who only trust him when he explains himself. He is forming sons and daughters who trust him because they know his heart. And that kind of trust is not built through answers. It is built through endurance. While you are waiting for words, God is shaping your inner life. He is teaching you how to stand without leaning on feelings, how to pray without emotional reward, how to obey without applause, how to love him not for what he gives, but for who he is. That kind of faith cannot be rushed. In the silence, God is stripping away false supports, things you didn't know you relied on. Affirmation, clarity, momentum, spiritual highs, but gently removed. Not to punish you, but to free you. Because anything you need more than God will eventually collapse. And God in his mercy allows it to collapse now, while he is still near, rather than later, when the fall would destroy you. While you hear nothing, God is also protecting you. There are prayers he delays because the timing is dangerous. Doors he keeps closed because you cannot yet see what waits on the other side. Answers he withholds because he would move too quickly, too confidently, too soon. Silence is often God's way of saying, trust me enough to stay. Joseph did not know what God was doing in prison. But God was aligning people, positions, and power far beyond Joseph's sight. David did not know what God was doing while he ran from Saul. But God was shaping the king who had no mercy, because he had needed it himself. Even Jesus spent 30 years in obscurity for 3 years of ministry. God is never idle. If heaven feels quiet, it is not because God has forgotten your name. It is because heaven is working in ways you cannot yet understand. And while you are waiting for God to speak, he is listening more closely than ever. Every prayer you think fell to the ground, he caught it. Every tear you wiped away, he counted it. Every night you endured without answers, he saw it. Silence does not mean your prayers went unheard. It means they were received into something larger than immediacy. There's a difference between God's silence and God's refusal. Refusal closes the door. Silence keeps it open. While he prepares you to walk through it. And here is something tender you need to know. God trusts you more than you think. He would not allow this season if he did not believe you could survive it. He would not ask you to wait if waiting would destroy you. The silence is not proof of your weakness. It is evidence of God's confidence in what he is forming in you. Right now, you are learning how to breathe without control, how to surrender outcomes, how to let God be God without needing to understand him. This is holy work. And though you may feel unseen, heaven is watching closely. God is doing in you what he cannot do in noise. He is building a faith that will not collapse when life becomes unclear again. Because silence does not last forever. But what it produces can last a lifetime. There comes a moment quiet and almost unnoticed, when the soul stops fighting the silence and begins to rest inside it. Not because the questions are gone, not because the pain has fully lifted, but because something deeper has settled: trust. This is where faith matures, not in certainty, but in surrender. Resting in silence does not mean you stop praying. It means you stop demanding immediate answers. It means your prayers become less about why, and more about here I am. And God honors the posture, because faith was never meant to be loud all the time. Some of the truest faith is whispered. Some of the strongest faith is quiet. Some of the deepest worship is simply staying when leaving would be easier. Resting in silence means you let God hold what you cannot fix. You stop replaying every mistake, every delay, every unanswered prayer. You stop measuring God's love by outcomes. You stop punishing yourself for not being stronger. You allow yourself to be human and God to be God. This is where trust begins again. Not the reckless trust of emotion, but the steady trust of relationship. The kind that says, even if I do not feel you, I will stay. Even if I do not hear you, I will wait. Even if I do not understand, I will not walk away. And here's the quiet truth many never hear. God does not ask you to trust perfectly. He asks you to trust honestly. To come to him without pretending, without spiritual performance, without masking your fear with religious words. Jesus never rebuked anyone for doubting. He rebuked hypocrisy, but he welcomed doubt. Thomas doubted and Jesus came closer. The disciples panicked and Jesus calmed the storm. The Father cried, I believe. Help my unbelief. And Jesus healed his son anyway. So rest. Rest from trying to hold yourself together. Rest from carrying the moral. Rest from needing certainty before obedience. God does not need you to be fearless. He needs you to be present. Sometimes trust looks like getting out of bed when you don't want to. Sometimes it looks like praying one sentence instead of 10. Sometimes it looks like saying, God, I don't know how to trust you right now, but I want. That desire alone is faith. And slowly, often quietly, God begins to speak again. Not always with answers, sometimes with peace, sometimes with endurance, sometimes with the strength you did not have before. The silence does not end because you mastered it. It ends when it has finished its work. When God speaks again, you will realize something sacred. You were never abandoned, you were being formed. Or once felt like absence becomes evidence of care. Or once felt like delay becomes protection. Or once felt like silence becomes intimacy. Because God is closest when He is shaping me from the inside out. So if you were listening to this right now, weary and unsure, know this: you are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are not failing God. You are being held, even in the quiet. And when you are ready, when your heart is no longer bracing for answers but resting in love, you will hear Him again. Not as thunder, not as pressure, but as a gentle assurance in your spirit. I was here the whole time. Come back to Jesus. Not because everything is clear, but because He is faithful. Let the silence become a sanctuary. Let trust grow without noise. Let your soul rest inside. Let trust rest. How does soul rest? And when you are ready, when your heart is no longer bracing for answers, but resting in love, you will hear Him again. Not as thunder, not as pressure, but as a gentle assurance in your spirit. I was here the whole time. Come back to Jesus. Not because everything is clear, but because He is faithful. Let the silence become a sanctuary.